The religious aspect of the conflict. The contemporary history of the Arab-Israeli conflict is very much affected by the religious beliefs of various sides and their ideas over a holy city of Jerusalem. Muslims claim their rights to that land in accordance with the Quran, contrary to the Jewish claim that this land was promised only to the descendants of Abraham's grandson Jacob. Israel, they argue that land of Canaan was promised to what they consider the elder son of Abraham, Ishmael, from whom Arabs claim descent. This was been a conflict and has brought the two groups into conflict over rightful possession of Jerusalem. Christian Zionists often support the state of Israel because the ancestral right of Jews to the Holy Land was suggested, for instance, by the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Romans, chapter 11 in Bible. The political tension, military conflict, and disputes between Arab countries and Israel escalated during the 20th century, mostly fading out in early 21st century. The roots of Arab-Israeli conflict have been attributed to the support by Arab League members countries for the Palestinians, a fellow League member in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which in turn has been attributed to the simultaneous rise of Zionism and Arab nationalism towards the end of 19th century, though the two-nation movement had not clashed until the 1920s. Part of Palestine-Israel conflict arose from the conflicting claims by these movements to the land that formed the British Mandatory Palestine, which was regarded by the Jewish people as their ancestral homeland, while at the same time it was regarded by the Pan-Arab movement as a historically and currently belonging to the Arab Palestinians, and in the Pan-Islamic context as a Muslim land. The sectarian conflict within the British Mandate territory between Palestine Jews and Arabs escalated into a full-scale Palestinian civil war in 1947. Taking the side of Palestinian Arabs, especially following the Israeli declaration of independence, the neighboring Arab countries invaded by then former Mandate territory in May 1948, commencing the first Arab-Israeli war. The nascent Israeli Defense Force repulsed the Arab nation from the part of occupied territories, thus extending its borders beyond the original UN partition plan. By December 1948, Israel controlled most of the portion of Mandate Palestine west of the Jordan River. The remainder of Mandate consisted of Jordan, the area that came to be called as West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Prior to and during the conflict, 713,000 Palestinian Arabs fled their original lands to become Palestinian refugees, in part due to promises from the Arab leaders that they would be able to return when the war had been won, and also in part due to attacks in Palestinian villages and towns by Israeli forces and Jewish militant groups. Many Palestinians fled from the area that are now Israel as a response to massacre of Arab towns by militant Jewish organizations. Over 7 lakh Jews immigrated to Israel between 1948 to 1952, with approximately 285,000 of them from Arab countries. In 1956, Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping and blockaded the Gulf of Aqaba in contravention of Constantinople Convention 1888. On 26 July 1956, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal Company and closed the canal to Israeli shipping. Israel responded on 29 October 1956 by invading the Sinai Peninsula with the British and French military support. During the Suez Canal crisis, Israel captured the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula. The United States and United Nations soon pressured it into a ceasefire. Israel agreed to withdraw from the Egyptian territory. Egypt agreed to freedom of navigation in the region and demilitarization of Sinai Peninsula. The UN Nations Emergency Force UNEF was created and deployed to oversee the demilitarization. IDF was only deployed on Egyptian side of the border as Israeli refused to allow them on its territory. Israel completed work on National Water Carrier, a huge engineering project designed to transfer Israel's allocation of Jordan's river waters towards the south of country in realization of Ben-Gurion's dream of mass Jewish settlement of the Negev desert. The Arabs responded by trying to divert the headwaters of the Jordan, leading to growing conflict between Israel and Assyria. In 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was first established by Yasser Arafat with purpose of the liberation of Palestine through armed struggle. It is recognized as the sole legitimate representative of Palestine people by over 100 states within which it holds the diplomatic relations, and as the official government of State of Palestine has enjoyed observer status at the United Nations since 1974. The PLO has always labeled the Palestinian people as Arabs. This was a natural consequence of the fact that PLO was an offshoot of Arab League. It also has a tactical element as to keep the backing of Arab states. Over the years, the Arab identity remained the stated nature of Palestinian state. It is reference to the Arab state envisioned in the UN partition plan. On 19th May 1967, Egypt again expelled the UNEF observers and deployed more than 100,000 soldiers in the Sinai Peninsula. It again closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, returning the region to the way it was in 1956 when Israel was blockaded. On 30th May 1967, Jordan signed a mutual defense pact with Egypt. Egypt mobilized the Sinai units crossing UN lines and mobilized and marched in Israel's southern border. On 5th June, Israel launched an attack on Egypt. The Israeli Air Force destroyed most of the Egyptian Air Force in a surprise attack, and then turned east to destroy the Jordanian, Syrian and Iraqi Air Forces. The strike was a crucial element in the Israel's victory in the Six-Day War. At the war end, Israel had gained control of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip at the West Bank, including the East Jerusalem, Sheba of Homs and the Golan Heights. The result of war affects the geopolitics of the region to this day and is called the Six-Day War. Then came the Yom Kippur War. On 6th October 1973, Syria and Egypt staged a surprise attack on Israel on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of Jewish calendar. The Israeli military were caught off the guard and unprepared and took out 3 days to fully mobilize. This led other Arab states to send troops to reinforce the Egyptians and Syrians. In addition, these Arab countries agreed to enforce an oil embargo on industrial nations including US, Japan and Western European countries. These OPEC countries increased the price of oil fourfold and used it as a political weapon to gain support against Israel. The Yom Kippur War accommodated indirect confrontation between US and Soviet Union. When Israel had turned the tide of the war, the USSR threatened military intervention. United States, wary of nuclear war, secured a ceasefire on 25th October. A large-scale hostilities mostly ended with ceasefire agreements after 1973 Yom Kippur War. Peace agreements were signed between Israel and Egypt in 1979, resulting in Israeli withdrawal from Sinai Peninsula and the abolition of military governance system in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, in favor of Israeli civil administration and consequent unilateral annexation of Golan Heights and East Jerusalem. The agreement also provided for the free passage of Israeli ships through the Suez Canal and recognition of Straits of Tiran and the Gulf of Aqaba as an international waterways. In 1970, following an extended civil war, King Hussein expelled the Palestinian Liberation Organization from Jordan. September 1970 is known as the Black September in Arab history and sometimes referred to as an era of regrettable events. It was a month when Hashemite King Hussein of Jordan moved to quash the autonomy of Palestine organization and restore his monarchy's rule over the country. The violence resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of people, the vast majority of Palestinians. Armed conflict lasted until July 1971 with the expulsion of PLO and thousands of Palestinian fighters to Lebanon. It is called Black September.